Hello there everyone and welcome to another episode with Feel Good with ME, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Maisie. Maisie is a barefoot shoe specialist. She's working on a doctorate so she can promote the knowledge and the importance of barefoot better. As you know, for me with fibromyalgia and ME and the pains I used to get in my feet and legs and lower back, I spent a lot of money on shoes which had insoles and were orthopedic, so to speak. And what I think happened in time with my feet is that I developed a flat arch. I'm not sure how exactly it happened, if it's a genetic thing, if it was a lack of exercise or just part of having fibro and ME. And I have a friend who is a mentor of mine. There's two famous mentors which I have, is David Powell and Dr. Ruben Thomas. And Ruben lived in Liverpool Street at the time. That was more than 10 years, maybe 12 years or 13 years ago. And they were about to open a Vivo barefoot shoe shop. And it's not an advertisement for them, I'm not sponsored by them, but they did try many barefoot shoes, and it seems to be one of the better ones that work for me. They just got it right with the width of the shoe, and slowly it seemed to strengthen my arch, and I redeveloped my arch. And walking on these shoes, it took a bit of time, like 3 months, to get used to them, because it was like wearing nothing, like walking on socks, and it was very difficult at the beginning because you feel every cobble beneath your feet. And slowly they really helped my pains and helped my ability to walk a bit further, and that was very important. So I became very passionate, and I understood that you want your shoes to be wide because your feet are not triangular at the end. They're actually supposed to be, I guess they're a little bit like your hand, that you want them to be spaced. They're not like that. Maybe it's a reflective, but anyway, maybe Maisie, you can tell us a little bit why barefoot shoes. Is it good, really good for us? Is the benefits, is the downfalls? Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into it, what you're studying exactly, and that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks, Idan. My name's Maisie, and I am a PhD student. And I guess my kind of journey started back in 2018. I had just graduated from university in rehabilitation and sports, so very much been kind of like with an exercise background. Always wanted to help sort of people. I was particularly looking at sports back then, and I delivered a presentation on, it was actually on windsurfing injuries because I'm a keen windsurfer myself. And the person who was chairing the chat then is my now supervisor. So he came to the chat and he, asked questions, instigated a chat with me. And we stayed in contact until December 2019. And that's when I began my sort of PhD project. So my PhD is all about looking at how footwear can influence a developing foot, so in children and adolescents. So a lot of the research has been done in adults. We know that, like Edan said, spending time barefoot or in a minimal shoe, potentially you're going to strengthen up those muscles in your feet. They're going to become stronger, potentially wider. And that's kind of where my background came from. So the biggest things that I've noticed is, the gold standard, the best thing that potentially what we could be would be barefoot, right? That's the what everyone kind of aspires to be. That's what those minimal shoe companies are basing their shoe on, is being barefoot. And I like to look at it from like an evolutionary point of view. So Daniel Lieberman, I've read a lot of his books and his research, and he explains that, in our sort of history of human evolution, footwear only became a thing, in a very minute part of that. So it's in the very present day, really. So when I look at the research online now, it's kind of from the 1970s, 1980s upwards is where we start to really sort of look at how footwear may influence the shape of the foot. And I think that's really important. All these kind of bunions and flat feet, we're all talking about them kind of quite in the present day. It's not, our ancestors and, hunter-gatherers didn't really struggle with that, or we don't think they did. So it's something that's happening, or something that's changed relatively recently in our history, that's causing the shape of our feet to change. And I think, like I say, being barefoot would be fantastic. However, I mean, I live in London. Potentially I'll be barefoot some places, but I wouldn't want to walk around the streets with no shoes on. And that's potentially where these sort of minimal shoe companies may come into play. But, I still wear normal shoes as well, but I just make sure I exercise without my shoes on as well. So I get the best of both worlds there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And for a person that's never wore barefoot shoes, how would you say is best? Is it you can just get on with your life, just put them on, or do you need to do like I did? I took it slowly and I was more careful. Is there any tips you can give us there?
For sure. So, it's like with any exercise, you're not going to go and, deadlift 100 kilograms or whatnot. So, Edan, you did it the most perfect way. So it's little and often to start with. I remember the first time I sort of exercised barefoot, and I was relatively active anyway. I was running quite consistently. I was going to the gym, and I kind of was like, oh, it should be fine. It'll be fine. And I went for about a 2K run in some minimal shoes, and my calves were burning. It activates all those calf muscles, the muscles in your feet, and they're not as active when you're wearing shoes. So it's so important to do it very regularly, but very sort of little and often, as I'd say. So you might start wearing them around the house to start with, or you might take a short walk, and then you're going to sort of build it up gradually. And I think Vivo Barefoot potentially are looking at sort of creating something where it's rather than just sort of giving the shoes, they're going to create a little bit of learning alongside to say, okay, if you want to transition into a minimal shoe, this is what you could do. Because otherwise it could cause injuries for sure, because you're just increasing that dosage way too much. It's too much stress on your muscles. So Edan, yeah, you did perfectly, nice and slow.
No, I was lucky. I remember the shop there was a really nice guy, and I guess it was quite new, so they had a lot of time. I had a very busy these stores at the moment, and he just explained to me really well that just take it really easy, and it made sense. And it felt as well really weird at the beginning, feeling all the bricks and everything, the road beneath you, and
Yeah.
so I just knew you take it slow. And is there much difference between the five fingers style shoes, which I also own, compared to a regular barefoot shoe? Is it better and worse? And also, if you can also cover with us, so when you walk in a shoe that is not flexible and it has a fixed sole and maybe a heel, do we know how it impacts the muscles and use and the bone or bone density? Because I know the more you hit the bone, the more density you develop in theory, or maybe you can go fractures. I don't know. Maybe you can tell us about that. But I do feel, since going barefoot, my feet and calves muscles, as you said, they really come to life, and it's just so natural. But maybe you can tell a little bit what a shoe that is not flexible, an orthopedic in theory, that's doing the underneath your arch, you have like a fist lifting.
Yeah.
So if you can tell us a little bit, how does it work when you don't have that, or what? Because
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, so with a conventional shoe, say a trainer that's got a thick heel, not very flexible, it's got to be said, for some people that say have a rigid flat foot, so one that won't get better with exercise, there is potentially a need for them to wear a thicker shoe, or something with a little bit more support. But for the most part, you can always strengthen your muscles. Okay, so there is a lot of research out there that shows spending time barefoot, you can sort of increase the height of your arch and so on and so forth. I guess the difference between a conventional shoe and a minimal shoe is the fact, exactly what you said earlier, Dan, is you can feel everything that you come into contact with, right? And you might not find it as much with walking, but if you were to run in a conventional shoe, because you've got such a thick cushioned heel, you will hit that heel down quite hard, because you can't feel any of the forces that are going through your body, right? And I think there's some research out there that shows you know, it's like 3 times the amount of force, energy going through your knees when you're heel striking. If I were to then try and heel strike in a minimal shoe or barefoot, it will hurt, so I wouldn't do it again. And that is it. So people think there's a massive, huge kind of like scientific explanation, but it's actually just your body. You can feel all of the energy that's going through the ground and into your foot. And because we're pretty clever, you're not going to do it again. You're going to say, okay, that hurt. I'm going to land a little bit, you know, on my midfoot or maybe on my, you know, the ball of my foot if I'm running. So that's the biggest kind of difference. Obviously the flexibility is, you know, it's going to allow our foot to do exactly what it was made for. You know, it's got that propulsion, the windlass technique. So, you know, it's got an arch for a reason. You know, it's our rigid lever. So as you sort of come into the ground, you're going to splay your foot, and then you're going to use that energy to then take your next step. Okay, and that's the most important thing. Also, when you heel strike, you use a lot of your sort of anterior muscles in your calf. So, and you can tell, like, even just sort of feeling your own calf on the front of your calf, there's not many muscles there. They're not very big, right? But the back, there is loads of muscles. So that's the kind of part that we want to be, you know, using is those back of the calf, the gastroc and your soleus. That's the muscles that we could use when we're sort of using our midfoot and our forefoot. But then the biggest difference is really, obviously you feel more of an effect when you're running. You feel less of an effect when you're obviously when you're walking. But it doesn't mean there's no difference, because again, you're still strengthening your muscles with whether or not you're walking or running. So there's a time and place for both.
Amazing. No, I feel like we will need to have you back for a small anatomy lesson here. But the way you describe how the arch really, it makes so much sense. I know in horses they also have those like rubber bands in the legs, so when it springs and it helps them run quicker. I remember hearing that once. But it makes sense as well that when we land, we want it flat and then to arch and push us forward, basically. Yeah, like I wouldn't be able to imagine, and I guess they're quite similar hands and feet. I'm sure there's major differences, but just putting your hand in a rigid gloves, that could be a nightmare. And since I've wore my 5-finger shoes as well, I've noticed every toe is, I can open my toes and close them, like do that. And I've been to Thailand and I've seen like some ladies there in how they dropped the pen and they picked the pen with the feet. That how much flexibility.
Yeah.
For me, it was like such an experience to see someone can so easily pick up a pen like that. But it's just coordination, and for the brain, it must be so healthy because it's all about coordination and stimulating those brain neurons. So maybe you can tell a little bit more about that, the connection with the brain and stuff. And I'm sure there will be aging research about that in future, how you can use it.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, your feet are just like your hands, right? So, you know, you stand on them, they give you feedback constantly throughout the day, you know, about the ground that you're coming into contact with. And I don't know if you've ever seen like the funny videos of like when people put shoes or socks on dogs and they start kind of walking funny. And it's kind of, it's similar to that, because obviously they're just not used to it and they're not getting any sensory feedback from it. So if you can spend time barefoot and feel different types of grounds, you're basically just giving information to your brain about that type of ground that you're coming into contact with. Very much similar to your hands. And it's funny, like you see children when they're younger and they're always kind of, you know, they're moving their toes and they're feeling. And my little brothers, they used to hate putting on their shoes. And you just thought they're being difficult, but actually, potentially, it's just the fact that they're not feeling anything. And, you know, they used to stumble and trip and all that kind of stuff as well, because they've got huge sort of soles on their feet. But again, it's just one of those where spending time connecting with your grounds is massively important, whether or not you do it all the time. Obviously, like I said earlier, in London, I don't particularly like to walk around barefoot, but, you know, I've got a garden with some grass. I'll take my shoes off and, you know, feel the ground there. You know, if in your back garden you've got patio or decking, just, you know, you start to feel things and you walk more consciously. And that's the thing I like, is that I'm consciously aware of every step I take and what I'm doing each time. And it gives me satisfaction. I'm not just doing something for the sake of it. I'm consciously thinking about it.
Now that makes so much sense. And also with one of the healthiest things they tell you can do is take your shoes off and walk barefoot on the beach or on grass, as
Yeah.
you said. And people do tend to feel better. Maybe there's two things to there. For sure, having your sensories activated and your mind feeling this different sensation, as you said, like when we touch different material, when we work with, so I work in kitchens a lot, so touching dough, it always is a very different feeling to opening a fridge door or a window.
Mm-hmm.
But also maybe there's some, I know the earth has magnetic fields and things, and I sleep on an earthing grounding mat. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. But it just makes sense that the body would be barefoot because all other animals and mammals, they're all barefoot and connected. So there's great thing. But I agree with you. In London or in most cities, we want to protect our feet. So with a minimal protection, it's
Yeah.
it's a great idea. Um, Anything else you think our audience should consider before buying a barefoot shoes, before going barefoot? Anything in particular you want to recap fast your studies is going to focus on? I'll have to have you back to do a bit about physiology of how it works, and maybe we can have a couple of slides just to illustrate it, because I can't emphasize enough how helpful this has been for me going barefoot on my journey back to trying to walk more and doing more things. So
Yeah, no, Eden, I find your story super interesting, and this is where research starts, is with, you know, not saying you're a case study, but you know, you've had an experience, and you know that's how it spurs on research. So we've got someone at the university who is beginning to look at footwear and autism. And that's purely from a personal sort of experience that they've had, you know, working with children with autism. So it all starts with stories and connecting with other people and chatting and just trying things. I think that's the biggest thing. But going back to your question about you know, information for people that are potentially looking to buy a minimal shoe or to go barefoot, is that it, you know, first of all, it doesn't have to be expensive, right? You don't have to go out and spend money on a really expensive minimal shoe. You can, around your house, especially at the moment when we're all spending quite a lot of time indoors because of the pandemic, you can walk around the house barefoot. You know, you can splay your toes, you can move them out, you can do some exercises, some, you know, some heel raises and all that kind of thing. And it doesn't have to be buying a shiny new pair of shoes to start with. Obviously, if someone is looking to buy shoes, and I would just say go into a shop, try them on if you can, and do a little bit of research. There's so much out there online now, and there's so many different brands that you can look into. I've never tried the Vibram Five Fingers, but I remember I used to have a pair of socks that were like that, and I used to find them very strange. But it's a personal preference, which is why I think it's so important that you try different pairs on. And then obviously the most important thing everyone can do is again just dosing. So don't go and walk 10,000 steps in your new minimal shoes straight away. Nice little and often, and that should help the muscles surrounding sort of your lower limbs strengthen up first, adapt to the loads, and then over time you'll be able to wear them more and more often.
that's amazing. Thank you so much, Maisie, for this quick introduction to barefoot shoes and walking, and for all your contribution in the field. And I'm looking forward to read some research from you, because it's those things which, because there's not a lot of science behind it, is it, as you say, it's only from the 70s 80s we can see any studies on the effect of shoes and walking on in different platforms that we're learning. But it's just so important. I really applaud you for what you're doing, because it's bringing us more power back to nature, and walking more naturally, and it just makes so much sense. So
No,
thank you for that.
definitely. Well, thank
And
you for having me too, Edan, and I'd love to come back and, potentially we can talk about different topics within this field. I mean, there's so much we could talk about. We'd be here for days, but for sure, I'd love to come back and chat some more with you.
absolutely, me, I'm so passionate about it. It made such a big impact in my life, and that's why I really reached out, and I wanted to find you, to do that, because it's really really an important thing that I think people, um, as you say, it's not maybe for every single one, but for many, it could be a game changer. I spent so much money on insoles and orthopedic shoes, thousands, and I really had no money. It was the last of my monies, and I tried 10, 12 different expensive shoes, and when I found Barefoot shoes, it just changed the game. It wasn't. It's just really, really. It was such a helpful thing where my body was collapsed. I couldn't walk. I could not walk at all. It was every step was more hurting, and putting those insoles with the support of that, it was just hurting more and more. So I'm really passionate about Barefoot, and I'll have you back. We'll do some slides. We'll go into more details.
Yeah.
We'll share the knowledge with the world. So thank you everyone for listening at home. If you have any questions specifically to Maisie, leave a comment below if you're seeing this on YouTube, or if you're listening to it on Spotify and another podcast platform. I will leave the link of my social media so you can get in touch via there. So thank you once again, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you in the future.
Cheers, Edan.